Hello and welcome, Sanjeev. If you could please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sanjeev Verma. I'm chairman and co-founder of Prevail. It's a company that builds a zero trust end-to-end encrypted email and file sharing system, and it's heavily used for by defense companies for storing, sharing CMMC and ITAR data. But it's a general purpose system that is used by any industry for communication within the company, with suppliers, partners, etc. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for that intro. So Prevail, what made you think about creating something like this? I mean, obviously Microsoft has solutions and is pretty popular in the compliance and cyberspace, but oftentimes their solutions are expensive and they raise their prices. And how did Prevail come about? What was your methodology around that?
Well, Prevail came about from a very purist attitude. I'm a serial entrepreneur. Before I started Prevail, I started a wireless communications company. And that company was started with a very simple premise that it was the year 2000. And we said, well, if Wi-Fi is such a great idea for sharing information between computers, people want to get access to the internet on cell phones. And believe it or not, at that time, people were saying, well, that's the craziest thing. Cell phones are for voice.
Right.
And we said, no, not only should they be about data, they should be about high speed data. And so I started a company with the crazy notion that data ought to be available on high speed networks. And we became the world's second largest supplier of what is now known as 3G and 4G. So about 40% of the US cellular data network on Verizon and Sprint ran on us. So you asked where did Prevail come about? So I ran the company for about 14 years. It was a publicly traded company. And I went back to MIT, my alma mater, and was intrigued by cybersecurity. And there I met two of the world's top, cybersecurity experts. My co-founder now, Raluca Popa and Nikolai Zeldovich, both were professors at MIT. Raluca's now at UC Berkeley. And in essence, they educated me that what we now recognize, but was not that obvious at that time, was that the traditional approach that virtually everybody, Microsoft, Google, everybody takes, is the approach of building walls around information, and those walls are of software, obviously, to prevent the bad guys from getting to the information. And while those are essential, you obviously want to prevent bad guys from getting to the information. It was clear in the research community and the intelligence community, even at that time, that despite your best efforts, the attackers and the adversaries will eventually get to the information. So what they were saying is that the right security systems ought to be those that protect information even when the attacker gets to the servers where it's stored. Even if the attacker breaches your password, even if the attacker breaches the admin who has access to your information on the server or in the user account. And those were what were the core principles that sort of guided us and said, that's what the world needs. And we were ahead of the time, both in the wireless systems and in Prevail. But ultimately, that's really how the system was created. And we decided to go and make it simple because security was complex. So we said, well, nothing complex is going to be used. So we're not going to compromise the key principles of protecting information even when the adversary kind of gets to it, a zero trust principle, but also to make it simple for people to use it with everyday communications in files, emails, etc. And that's really how we came about Prevail. It wasn't our goal to build a system for compliance. It turns out that because Prevail is a really highly secure system and it is easy to use, it turns out it's an excellent system for CMMC and ITAR compliance. But we never really went about and saying, let's go build something that will be in compliance with regulations. So in a nutshell, we take a security first approach to data protection, and compliance is an outcome of that. And that's how we were born out of MIT. We were looking to build something great that would transform security, and hopefully Prevail plays a part in doing so. And certainly when we look at the environment today, I think there's every reason to believe that systems like ours are sorely needed.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite things about your system is the passwordless technology, not having to deal with passwords. I mean, we're humans, we are terrible with passwords.
Yeah. Well, it's again back to the core principles of Prevail. The two core principles were, number one, that no matter how well protected the system, the attacker is going to get to it. They'll get to the servers, they'll break the passwords. You can come up with complex passwords, and I'll speak more to that. And they'll break the admins who also are accessing systems through passwords. So passwords are particularly deadly because no matter how complex a password you create, generally speaking, it can be either brute forced or guessed or phished and spoofed. And if the attacker compromises your password or your credentials, you get access to the information. And the second aspect of passwords is that we all live in a world where we want anytime access to information. And so consequence of these password-based systems was that you could log in remotely. In fact, that's exactly what you're seeing with the attack through SolarWinds on the US government. The attackers aren't in the Pentagon or in the Department of Justice. They're in because they have user credentials, they've
Right.
infiltrated the networks. So from a passwordless system, here's how Prevail addresses it. And we'll come to the rest of the elements of it. But first of all, any access credential should not be brute force guessable. And so with Prevail, your password access is actually replaced by an access through your private decryption key. So for each user, there's their email address that serves as their identity, just like your phone number could, but in Prevail, we use email address. And attached to it is a set of public private keys. So it's your private key that serves as the authentication mechanism and the decryption mechanism for you. So why is that good? So number one, the, the decryption key, the private key, is equivalent to the number of atoms in the universe, not just in our solar system, not on Earth, but the entire universe, which has 100 billion galaxies, each with 100 billion stars, and we're one of them. So no amount of compute power can guess that right now. So you can't brute force it. The second important aspect is that the key is tied to your device. So your private key is stored on your device. So let's say you're accessing Prevail and you're a user, you have Prevail on your computer and on your phones and your iPads. Your private key will be on all of them and you don't need to know anything about it. It's automatically there. In addition, there's a device key, one for the phone, one for the computer, one for, say, the iPad, which are different. So first, you can't guess these keys, and it's a combination of these keys that gets you access. The user doesn't have to type anything, so you don't have to remember any password. And the third and most important thing is, since these keys are on your devices, it's only your devices that can access your information. There's no remote login. So you don't have adversaries that are halfway around the world that are remotely logging in because they are brute forced or stolen or phished or spoofed your password. And from the user's perspective, it's one less headache that you don't have to remember anything. You've just got a secure key on your system. And I'm sure viewers will probably be looking for, well, how is that key protected? Quite well. So if it's on the phone, it's in the app and it's got biometric authentication. So even if your phone's available to the adversary, and remember, it has to be physically available to them, and they've gotten into the phone, still they can't get at your Prevail information because the app has biometric authentication. On the computers, it's under encrypted storage on an admin privilege account. So again, while it's not impossible, it is extremely hard because now the attacker has to physically get to the machine or fully get into it, which is a really difficult thing. And again, you have to do it user by user by user. And that's why the passwordless systems are important. And I'll say more about this when the passwords are the passwords that belong to the admins. And so we'll speak more about how we protect admins. Because if you compromise the password of an individual user, you just get one user's account. But if you compromise an admin, you've got the entire organization.
Right.
So that's how we sort of help with a passwordless system. And that's really where modern security is headed right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the recent headline, the DHS is now adopting CMMC compliance now. So I think that there's going to be bleed over into that.
Yep.
Um, with the CMMC, I think it's so complicated. I think it's a great methodology. I think it's awesome that they now require that third party audit of systems and things like that. And I love what you've done with Prevail, especially with all of the scoring with SPRS. You're able to really elevate by purchasing Prevail and implementing Prevail properly. You can get your score from a negative to a positive 65 in pretty much record time. And then with some more configurations, bring it up to 85. One of the questions I had is one of the challenges in the CMMC space is while you've done a fantastic job in securing the data with passwordless technology and zero trust, as well as the email, a lot of folks have data all over the place, like in their financial systems and things like that. Um, do you think with your awesome passwordless technology that there would ever be in the future some type of API or way to extract data out of other systems and put them into the Prevail secure system?
Well, this short answer of it is that we do offer APIs right now. And, you know, while it's true that, certainly for very large organizations, there are complex, systems that are holding financial data, etc. Uh, one has to simplify it. CUI is going to be, largely design information, special defense contract information, presumably also starting with the DoD originating it. And so when the DoD transmits it to you, you're in good stead by putting all that document, uh, design data, etc., in Prevail Drive and use it with whatever application, and then sharing it on email if that's what you want to do. But using APIs, it has always been our ambition and our vision and our hope that the security principles that underlie Prevail, which we've developed into a very simple email and file sharing system, aren't limited to those. But
Mhm.
the same security principles are applied to the way you store data in the cloud for whatever application that you're using. And therefore, we have always made available APIs. And so, as time goes by, whether it's other applications that you're using or it is financial systems that you're using, um, you can always call those APIs and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You call an API and say, store my data encrypted in simple terms, and it'll do so. And it'll do all the generation of the encryption keys, store it, share it. All of that is done with a single command, as opposed to, creating a system that can, create the keys, find the right places to store, change those keys, make them available to admins and so forth. So absolutely, Prevail does make that available, but we'll take baby steps. And again, CMMC should also be looked at saying, let's consolidate and secure our CUI and ITAR data first. And then we've got the majority of sensitive information protected. And then we go and get better at it. And we now look at other applications and other pieces of information and slowly make our way towards, more and more of our information protected with modern principles that make it really hard for the adversary to get at it.
Yeah, well said. I think that that's absolutely true. I think that, a lot of people with the CMMC, they're confused. They don't know where to start. So I think Prevail is awesome to start with securing the email and the data storage, because like you said, it's where most of the CUI and FCI is living. So let's secure that first. And then, I call them puzzle pieces or onion layers. There's several layers to this. And starting off with secure storage and secure email, and then moving off into the other pieces of the enterprise where, where else does CUI live? Where is the spillage? What, policies, procedures, security control layers, et cetera. And then kind of expand from there. Obviously, DFARS and the interim rule compliance has been, a big thing. At November 30th of 2020 was the deadline for that. And, we're still consulting with a lot of folks and recommending Prevail as a starting point for them to accelerate their work to be done, because, quite frankly, a lot of them have a lot of work to do because they haven't done very much in their organization. So there's a lot of structure and workflows that need to be built. But I'm also noticing that there's other industries. I know when you built Prevail, it really wasn't, focused on CMMC, but I'm noticing that auto dealerships that deal with, sensitive public information could benefit from Prevail. Um, Also HIPAA and, HIPAA compliance and healthcare compliance, could also benefit. What do you think about those compliance regulations?
Well, we think that, what you're saying is absolutely correct, that, Prevail is a general purpose email and file sharing system. In fact, we've designed it such that it's a free system for anybody to use. So if you are an individual, it's simple enough. Just like if you want to send a secure message, you choose Signal or WhatsApp. You can choose Prevail for all your email and files. And it's simple enough that, any user basically can get and use Prevail with any email address, whether it's on Google or Yahoo or whatever. So our goal and ambition has always been, and our guiding principles have always been, that Prevail is a general system that any industry ought to be using. It's a rather unfortunate reality that most people gravitate towards systems like ours through the compliance mandate rather than approaching them from the fact that they ought to be securing their information for the sake of securing it, because it's their information and the client's information and so forth. Part of it is just understandable. It's human nature. We are, as a human race, evolved such that if I see somebody with a weapon in front of me, I perceive the threat instantly. I said, oh, there's somebody who's going to attack me, and I am going into a defensive mode. We're not that good in actually responding to an enemy or a threat that is unseen. And cybersecurity is just that. It's not that it occurs to you on a daily basis. The adversaries are sitting 10,000 miles away. You don't see them. You don't see their face.
Well,
Nothing is
also
changing.
because most people don't have any type of monitoring to see those threats, right?
And absolutely. And so you're not cognizant that there is an organization of 20,000 people out there snooping at your network and trying to get in. And so therefore we postpone that to the next day. Okay, yeah, I understand conceptually security is important, but let's go forward. And I think that the CMMC and HIPAA and personal information compliance mandates sort of are addressing that very natural human frailty. Before this, we all knew as part of the DIB that, we're working on sensitive, information, that we ought to be taking extraordinary steps to safeguard it. But not very many companies actually had the know-how or actually took the steps to
Well, I think that
the
they
highest
don't.
level.
I don't think they intentionally mean to do something
Abs-
bad, but I think it's an educational concept around people have a false sense of security, especially with email. They think that if I'm just going to email you something, that it's just going to be secure and get to you. But the reality is they don't understand all the hops that it goes through and how it's like a postcard.
Absolutely. Well, I think, as I mentioned, that's why I was saying that part of it is you're not cognizant of the magnitude of the threat. And most organizations weren't trained to recognize what you were saying, that whether it's files or emails, you know, they've heard things like, well, email encrypts in transit and at rest. And they kind of think, oh, it's some kind of encryption going on, so it's secure. But the bottom line is that, and we'll go into it in more detail, why encryption in transit and rest is the biggest myth of all security. but people aren't ready to do it. So compliance mandates, by putting some consequences and putting some requirements, force companies to do what they ought to be doing. And I'm absolutely reiterating what you were saying. It's not that they were maliciously ignoring security. It's just that it's a combination of the threat's not apparent and the knowledge is not apparent to the company on what constitutes good security. So just as CMMC is doing, it's driving a sense of urgency in the defense industry. HIPAA and other compliance objectives do so for other industries. And Prevail happens to be an excellent system for whether you're a law firm or a financial firm or a hedge fund or a medical company. But I also submit just as an individual. If you've got information, use the free version and protect it, because there are a ton of people interested in taking advantage of what folks are doing as a business and as an individual. So it's a broad system with use across multiple segments, defense being one of them.
Well said. Talk a little bit more about the you mentioned the encryption of email. A lot of people think that, oh, well, it's TLS or SSL encrypted, I'm safe,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So I think, if I may, I will speak to it, but I might even actually show you an
Yeah, absolutely.
animation, that, could you enable screen sharing, please?
Absolutely. One second. There you go.
So I'm going to, with your permission, share my screen and show you, the fundamentals of security. So when you have information on a traditional email, that email absolutely does get encrypted in transit. It gets encrypted on your device, and it gets to be sent to the server where it's stored, which could be a cloud server or your Exchange server on premise. And it is also correct that that email may very well be encrypted at rest. So you've heard terms encryption in transit and encryption at rest. So take a look at this little animation. Your email goes encrypted in transit, stored encrypted at rest, then it gets hopped over to the receiving company's mail servers. But what is not understood is that these servers, whether they be for O365 or G Suite or any of the services, essentially have the ability to decrypt that email. So when it goes encrypted in transit, the server receives it and can open it. It does processing on it. Oftentimes they render the emails, particularly on Gmail. They're looking at it for keywords often. And certainly the Gmail of yonder used to, sell advertising based on your email. And that's the issue, because if the email can be seen on the server, then the attacker can get at this email. And therein lies the second conundrum. So you physically think that, oh, the attacker's got to get to the server, and that's a really hard thing to do. And it's not as challenging as that. If the email is seen on the server, whether yours or the receiving company's, suppose the server didn't have the appropriate security patches that were up to date. A new security patch is released. The attackers look at it, they get into the server, and now suddenly, since the email is visible there, they can read it. Second, that email is a user's email. If you compromise the user's password, again, you can read the email. Third, if you're an admin who is manning that company's servers, so you've got an IT admin, that admin can read all those emails. And if I breach that admin, I can read those emails. And then finally, suppose that there was a bug in the firewall that was protecting the server. You can breach that and get to it. And that's exactly how the big breaches occurred. So when the breach occurred with Amazon's storing of Capital One's data, it was not Amazon's fault, but an admin found a vulnerability in a firewall, got to the servers, and they could read all of Capital One's information. Same things happening in the DoD, not the DoD, the the United States government, I want to clarify, the DoD wasn't breached. The US government agencies were breached, including, Justice Department, Treasury, etc., with the SolarWinds attack. The information is visible on the server, and so the attacker can get to it. And that's the big myth of encryption in transit and encryption at rest. The final thing to also remember is, even if you say that I have taken great measures to protect my server, when the email goes from your server to the receiving company server, which is exactly what's happening when a prime, for example, communicates with suppliers, those servers at the suppliers aren't as well protected. And so again, at the end of the day, if the server can see the information, so can the attacker. And we can now have the basis to see how to address this using, again, end-to-end encryption. So let me show you that. So when you recognize that no matter how hard you try, the attacker can get to the server, you're now forced to reckon with a system which says, look, since the server can be breached, let me encrypt my email or file on the sender's device, and it shall remain encrypted at all times on the server and directly only delivered to the recipient. The big difference here is, unlike encryption in transit and encryption at rest, if you have an end-to-end encrypted system, the server has no key whatsoever, can never decrypt it. So even when the attacker gets to the server, all they get is encrypted gibberish, which no known technology can decrypt, because the keys to decrypt it are on the sender's device and on the recipient's device. And that's why the NSA, when it was counseling, agencies in the government and outside on what's the best way to protect information in the wake of the pandemic, they said, use end-to-end encryption. So that's the first point to understand on why that end-to-end encryption achieves the goal of, an attacker, even if they get to the information, not really getting anything, versus encryption in transit and encryption at rest, really saying, I got to be right 100% of the time. And if you are wrong even 0.1% of the time, and you always are, either through admin breaches, server breaches, password breaches, the attacker gets in, and once they get in, they see the stuff.
Right. No, that's awesome. Thanks for showing that too. That was a great overview and demonstration. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? Like, obviously, this is solving a bulk of the problems. Like you said, NSA recommends end-to-end encryption. Obviously, Microsoft has the GCC suite, right, which is the really hard to get. There's only like 6 or 7, I think, resellers in the United States where you can buy the GCC high version for DoD that's manned by U.S. citizens, background checked, et cetera, to accommodate for CMMC and NIST compliance. But isn't it true that that solution's still not end-to-end encrypted?
It's not an end-to-end encrypted system. It is a system that takes the taller walls approach to protection of your information seriously. So it's saying, okay, I am going to guard the servers with better technology, and then limit access to those servers to US citizens, put those servers on US soil, etc. Prevail's approach is similar to them in the sense that, our default servers for government clients are Amazon Web Services, GovCloud, also made by US personnel, also on US soil, also on sovereign land, also having state-of-the-art protection. But the Prevail system, unlike GCC, doesn't rely on the notion that, oh, I've done all these good things, and so the attacker will never get to the information. They will always get to the information. But when they get to the information in the Prevail system, then they get nothing. And in such systems, when you're thinking about security, you've always got to assume the worst. So we assume that even Prevail employees could be untrustworthy. There is a possibility that a Prevail employee tries to get access to the information. There's a possibility that there is a US citizen who is at AWS GovCloud or at GCC High, who for whatever reason decides to go and try to get access to the information. These things have happened in the past.
Absolutely.
The difference is that with Prevail, the system, since it's designed to trust nobody, not even Prevail, and the information is encrypted at all times, therefore the information is secure. So again, I want to make sure that the viewers understand that your information on Prevail is also on a government cloud, manned and accessible by US personnel on the GovCloud part of it. And GCC does a great job with it. It's a capable system, one that we respect. But at the end of the day, we feel we take security to the point where even if that is breached, your information is safeguarded. So that's where, we bring an approach,
Well,
and we make it simple for small to medium businesses to adopt it very quickly, because GCC, because of the complexity of the system, is hard to deploy. It takes months to deploy. It's an expensive system. And I think Microsoft, to be fair to them, acknowledged that. They have said in their latest communique yesterday, yeah, it's not going to be simple. It's not going to be inexpensive. And what Prevail says is, it is inexpensive. It is simple. Deploy it in a day, just overlay it over your O365 or G Suite or whatever you've got, and you get best of both the worlds. You get obviously the protections of a very well protected cloud on where the information is stored, but the system, because it's end-to-end encrypted, doesn't rely on that, even if it's breached. And we believe that at some point all these systems will be breached somehow, because the adversary is very, very capable. Then all they get basically is gibberish. So
yeah,
that's the difference in approach.
and I like that approach too, because a lot of the threats are insider threats too. You've got rogue employees, you've got system administrators that have a lot of knowledge in their head, and maybe their latest salary negotiation doesn't go so well, and they they want
You
to.
never know.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, that you just saw what happened at Twitter twice. First, Saudi Arabian intelligence, we believe, got access to the records of communication and tweets, in response to the Khashoggi, murders. Now, the folks that provided the information were admins within Twitter. Similarly, there was another breach recently where the Twitter accounts of former President Obama and others were compromised. They were Twitter admins. And there's every reason to believe that Twitter takes security seriously. They have put processes, technologies, countless people to go and protect that information. It's not that Twitter is at all a lax organization. They are doing their best. But it is a fundamental vulnerability that they are relying on admins to protect and safeguard information, and the servers can see the information. So therefore you got a hole. Whereas in a Prevail system, no single admin can access the information. And if you get to the server, you get nothing. And that's the reason why these modern zero trust systems, work. And in essence, I mean, you're seeing that with messaging as well. If you really want to send a secure message to somebody, you're not going to go and send it as well intentioned as Apple is on an iMessage. If you want truly to have a secure communication, you encrypt end to end on a Signal or on a WhatsApp, because similar to what we're saying, no passwords can breach that. The providers of the service can't access it. And that's really also why the State Department issued the regulations on storing and sharing ITAR data. Very specifically, they said, till now, you're not allowed to store and share data on a cloud service. But if under Section 120.54, which became the law last March, a company wants to store and share ITAR data and share it with foreign, subsidiaries, etc., they can do so provided the following conditions are met. Number one, the cloud service is end-to-end encrypted. They recognize it. Can they work with the NSA to come up with this guideline? So it's encrypted by the sender and can only be decrypted by the recipient. The cloud where it's stored cannot decrypt it. Second, they say the cloud provider must not have any access to either decryption keys, network access codes, or passwords. And third, they say that they should use trusted algorithms like FIPS 140-2 to encrypt it. And that's exactly what Prevail does. Again, we didn't come at it to design the system to comply with ITAR. We had designed these because those are fundamental security principles. And of course, ITAR adopted them. And that's really the way to kind of think about it. Take a security first approach. I also want to emphasize that, as an industry, we have a choice right now. Yes, the DoD is mandating that we comply with CMMC, and it's a good thing. I applaud Katie Arrington for pushing this. We also have a choice where we can choose whether we approach CMMC security, CMMC compliance with the security first principle or through a check the box principle. And I would argue that ultimately we've got to take a security first principle. And
Absolutely.
what we really like about Prevail is that it makes the security first approach also the easier and the less costly approach. It is a lot easier to go on a system that is a lot more secure and a lot less expensive. And so in this case, we really ought to be pursuing a security first approach to compliance. And it's the same with messaging as well. It turns out that the most secure messaging systems are also the easiest to use, which is WhatsApp. Anybody can start with it in minutes, or
Right.
Signal. And same with Prevail. So, we ought to see things clearly. And if we take the approach of a security first, DIB first, we have a unique opportunity where the solution that, we're fortunate enough to provide also is the easier and the less expensive, path forward. So that's really what we love about where we are today.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I've taken what you've done and mapped it to the system security plan and created policies and procedures around that to also further along and make it easier for the little guys to comply with the CMMC mandates.
And you're doing a great job with that, Craig, because ultimately, when you look at CMMC, those that love and revel in complexity will obviously find a great deal of complexity. It's 17 domains, 130 controls, and so forth. But life is not about boiling the ocean, and Einstein didn't figure out, the secrets to the universe by making things complex. You got to simplify. And what you're doing is simplifying things. So the path to CMMC compliance is start with a foundation technology to store and share your CUI in a manner that is compliant with CMMC, or one of the ways to do it. GCC certainly is an option. You pick whatever is your favorite. And second, work with a consultant like yourself, who then addresses the remaining gaps that are not addressed by Prevail or GCC. And then you provide policies and procedures, and in some cases, supplementary technologies to your clients. And through that simple combination of underlying technology like Prevail, a basic system security plan, and augmented policies, procedures, and technologies from Petronella Inc., you've got yourself in shape to be ready for facing an audit. And that's the three-step process that almost any company ought to be looking at. And here I want to be again careful in saying, even if you go the GCC route, because it turns out it's a better solution for you for whatever reason, it's the same simplifying principle. It's the basic system, policies and procedures plus a consultant like yourself to guide them through what's remaining. And that's what puts the DIB company in the best position to confidently address CMMC.
Yeah, what we've done too to further that along is we actually launched a whole separate website called ComplianceArmor.com, where we've built out what I call these onion layers or these puzzle pieces. And we've packaged Prevail with Petronella services, policies, procedures, and everybody's at different places with this, and they're at different budgets and timelines. So we try to make it easy for them to adopt. And we always recommend starting with something like the Prevail bundle that we've created, because we've secured that relationship with you guys and that partnership, and then we've bolted on our consulting services to just make it it's the easy button for folks.
We appreciate that, and I think that again, when you look at the defense industrial base, we're looking at potentially 50,000 companies that will be required to get level 3 compliance, and those companies are structured in a pyramid. They are the big primes at the very top, and arguably there's probably 1,000 of them. For the most parts, the very biggest primes were already CMMC ready because they were sophisticated organizations with big budgets and sophisticated security personnel. So they're pretty much there, and I would submit probably exceed CMMC guidelines at level 3 already. But the remaining 49,000 organizations are organizations from 500 people down to 5 people. And for them, especially the ones that are at 20, 50, 100 people, they don't have compliance people. They don't have sophisticated IT staff. They're in the business to do what they're doing and not learn about even cybersecurity. Much as it's dear to my heart, it shouldn't be their primary focus. And so what you're doing is, for those 49,000 companies, you're making it simple for them, and you're making it inexpensive for them. And that's wonderful because you get them on a platform that is deployed in a day versus months, which is what we offer with Prevail. And the second is you offer policies and procedures that you've sort of pre-worked and built into a core system, such that the custom work that you got to do on a client by client basis is less and less. And so you can help a lot more companies. And from a company's perspective, it's also simple. Well, let me deploy Prevail. Craig, I'll work with you, get the basic policies and procedures. I am, pick your number, 80, 90% there. You help them with the remaining 20%. And now let's go face the audit process.
Right.
And now the goal of CMMC has been achieved because you've created fundamental security, and you have done so relatively quickly for the
Yeah, it's a huge
client.
catalyst.
And
Absolutely.
and that's wonderful because as a nation we are better protected, as a defense industrial base we're better protected. And it wasn't like boiling the ocean. It wasn't that it's taking years and oodles of dollars to kind of do that. So
Right.
that's where innovation and sort of leadership come together. And again, I can't applaud Katie Arrington enough for setting the tone, for seeing the big picture, putting this framework together. And then, as always happens in America, no matter how hard the challenge, the private sector rallies around to come up with solutions that are efficient, inexpensive, etc. And we saw the same with COVID.
Yep.
Nothing like, we saw a big challenge. Naysayers would have said it can't be done, wouldn't be done, it'll take 5 years.
Yep.
And in 9 months, there were vaccines from
That's right.
multiple companies. And it wasn't that they were $1 trillion. They were,
Right.
built with the right budget, and CMMC is the same thing. So
Yep.
we're in a good spot right now. A lot of work to be done, but we're doing the right things together. And I appreciate what you and your organization are doing to help the SMBs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's dive in. If you have a few minutes, if you don't mind, let's just do a quick overview of the solution. If you don't mind sharing your screen and.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So let me share my screen here. So as I mentioned, we take a security first approach. I already shared with you the basic principles of end-to-end encryption. I also shared with you the Prevail system having no passwords. And the fact that, as you see on the right, your private key on your devices is what allows you to get access to your information, so there can be no remote login. The third principle that I'd like to share is how to prevent the worst attacks from occurring, which is if your admin is compromised, as you see in a traditional system on the left, there's an admin, super user privileges, the attacker goes after the admin and gets everything that the admin has. This is exactly what is happening with the current attacks. In Prevail, as an enterprise system, you're absolutely allowed as an admin to get access to a particular user's emails or files, but also the organizations, for example, for e-discovery. But you cannot do so by yourself. So there's a notion of what's called an approval group. Think of it like the nuclear launch codes. I need approval from a certain minimum number of approvers before I get access to privileged or encrypted or confidential information. So if you see this little animation, what happens with the approval group is that the user's private key is broken up and distributed amongst the group of admins or approvers. So each admin now has only a little fragment. So if they go rogue or if they're compromised, they cannot access the information because the information needs to be decrypted with a full key and the admin has only partial key. But when they get approval, as this little animation is showing, the key gets constructed, you can decrypt the information and then system rekeys itself. It's important to recognize that this keying and rekeying and breaking up is any n out of m. So you can set an approval group that has 8 people, but you require permission from only 3, so that if people are on vacation, etc., it doesn't bother. And then the final aspect of the system is what's called trusted communities. So you define your organization's domain and that of your suppliers and certain trusted partners. And now your CUI and FCI and ITAR data just flows within this trusted community. Even if I'm an outsider who has a Prevail account, I can't communicate in and information can't be exfiltrated out. And that's what makes you now ring fence your CUI and make it secure to attack on the servers, passwords, etc. Let me now quickly show you Prevail in action. So as you're familiar with GCC, you're required to rip and replace O365 or G Suite. With Prevail, you stay on those. So I'm going to show you email first. Here's your existing system, could be O365 or Exchange. Here's a user, her name's Alice, and these are her regular emails, obviously non-compliant. You can see even Microsoft sending Valentine's Day greetings. So can the attacker, could be phishing and spoofing you. When you join Prevail, it adds an encrypted inbox with the same email address. You don't need a new email address. And this is where all your CUI compliant emails, etc., come. So you'll deploy Prevail to those users in your company that access CUI or ITAR data. And the email is accessed just as you're used to. You open it, no special site, no nothing. You say thanks. You'll notice that it says that it's encrypted and you send it. What happens when you are sending an email? The system has auto encrypt capability. So you create an email. Let's say you're sending it to somebody, Ed Murphy, who's on a Gmail system outside the company, but handles CUI. The moment you type his email, notice what happens. It switches automatically to encrypted mode. And here's a demo for Petronella. And you can put CUI, you can put ITAR, you can put, FCI in this, and all the capabilities that you're used to in Outlook just work, and you just send this thing. So at the other end, I said that Ed Murphy is on a Google account, also non-compliant, but Ed says, I'll receive my emails, email, And so what Prevail does is adds a secure messages tab. Here's the regular inbox where non-compliant messages on Google. Here's the secure messages, and here's the email that I just sent, which has CUI and FCI. This email can't be compromised even if your Google password's compromised. It can't be seen on any Google server. The admin can't compromise it by themselves. And obviously the server is only having an encrypted copy, and that server is on GovCloud. And the second aspect of Prevail is file sharing. So we've got this thing called Prevail Drive. When you create your Prevail account, it'll create a folder. Here's my little demo folder here. And you basically go and create subfolders in there. And this is where you basically go and put your CUI and FCI. I'll show you on the left my phone. So here's my phone. Here's the Prevail app. Again, it's got biometric authentication. And here are all the emails that are sent for Alice. And at the bottom, you'll see Prevail Drive. So notice that if you create a folder on the computer, it's mirrored on your phone because it's got your key. If you, for example, have a new project, you open it, you've got the same files on both sides. And now if you wanted to, for example, add a new file to it with CUI, you simply drag and drop it. Notice what happens. It basically gets encrypted, uploaded, and you'll see it's synced with your phone. Any changes you make to the document are synced. And then you can also share this. So if you, for example, are on the phone and you say share, you can add the email address of the recipient. And if you want the recipient to further share, you say edit and share. But if you want the recipient to only view the information in a browser and not even download it onto the computer or phone, you say view only, and that's really what happens. And you can do the same thing by simply right-clicking and saying share on the computer. And you can also do the same on a browser. So again, you can access Prevail on a browser. Here's the new Navy BAE project. You'll see the project has people on it. That means it's shared. When you say share, it shows you who it's been shared with. You can add people to it. And more importantly, you can set a recall date. So you can say, I am sharing for, say, 2 days or 6 months. And think of the use case. If you are communicating with a supplier and you have a project for 6 months, today, if you share something, the supplier has the information in perpetuity. You may not even be doing business with them. And if they get hacked, your information's gone. But with Prevail, you set an expiration date. And when you set the date, say, for example, for this case, February 26th, tomorrow, after tomorrow, the information will be deleted from the shared person's computers and phones and recalled. And that's a quick view of Prevail. It's simple from an admin perspective. You can see the users down to the devices. So in conventional systems, you don't know where people are logged in. Here, since a key-based access, you can see that Baker is only able to access his account from his PC and these 3 phones. Everything is logged, obviously, for compliance perspective. These are tamper-proof logs. You can set up trusted communities by simply specifying the domains that you trust or email addresses. And now communication can only be between the trusted community. And as I had mentioned, if you've got compliance and you want to look at a compliance request, you want to look at emails for certain users or the entire organization. Say you've been sued for e-discovery. You say, I want these emails and files. You don't have the keys to them, but it'll say, go get permission from the approval group. Once you get the permission, you get the decrypted emails and files. And that's a very, very quick overview from both a usability perspective. As a O365 user, as a G Suite user, you saw Prevail on mobile devices, on browsers, and you saw Prevail Drive on all these devices and an admin view to it. So that's, in a nutshell, a very quick overview. And this system can be deployed, as Craig, you do all the time, in a day for a typical organization. It takes an hour, you onboard people, and off you go.
That was fantastic. Thank you. Just one quick question on the secure Prevail data drive storage. I'm assuming it's bit level and doesn't really care what the data is. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay.
It doesn't care what application the data is. Any application data is encrypted and stored over there, and accessible. Um, the only constraint is on the view only privilege. When you are saying you cannot download and it's only rendered in a browser, then the browser will render, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, PDFs, and the popular formats. But you can't obviously at this time, on a view only basis, just look at, say, a CAD file. But if you wanted to look at a CAD file in any other format, like, edit and share, it's all encrypted and stored, and you'll have access to it on a local copy, and you can open it and access it. So we provide you with the ability to use any file of any format.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sanjeev. This has been fantastic.
I appreciate, Craig, the work that you're doing. I appreciate the time that you have advocated and allocated for us. And I wish you well in the efforts that you're taking with great seriousness to protect your clients. And we love working with you.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Same here. I think your solution's awesome and it's become a part of our culture here. We use your technology as well and we encourage others in our ecosystem to use it. Like you said before, it doesn't have to be CMMC or defense contractors. It could be other businesses that we help that are in regulations like HIPAA compliance or GDPR or other regulations.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again. Um, Love what you're doing, and look forward to doing more and more of it.
Absolutely. Yes, us too. Well, thank you again. Have a great rest of your day and we'll see you on the other side.
Will do.